Welcome to Lou Palumbo's Between the Lines. Problem solving for our future. Lou. Common sense, logic, and reasoning. Lou. The man that can't stand hate and animus. Lou. Stimulating the thought process of America. Lou. Where being right is not political, it's factual. Lou. Providing real solutions in real time. And now, here's your host, Lou Palumbo.
I wish I could tell you that the conversation has changed. I wish I could tell you it was getting better, but it's not, ironically enough. I've been telling people since I started doing this podcast, and I did this show in Jacksonville for like 8 or 9 months, whatever it was, and it was successful and very well received. I spoke about this border issue, and it just continues to escalate. And for everyone that isn't watching what's going on in Mexico with the drug cartels since the apprehension of El Chapo's son, you should be, because you have to understand that basically what we have at our southern border is another form of Al-Qaeda. They are that heavily armed and organized that they don't just tiptoe across Southern California's border and invade it is beyond me, because they have the armament, they have the weaponry to do that right now. They declared war on the government, Mexico, since the apprehension of his son, and they're even shooting at commercial airliners. At some point in time, I'm hoping the light goes on with this country and they understand the gravity of this problem. For some reason, we're just not getting it. I have heard that the Mexicans have used drones, ironically, to target the cartels, which is something I recommended we do well in advance of this episode. In reference to the Democratic elected officials in the bordering states to Mexico, Arizona, California now, Gavin Newsom, and Texas, they're pleading with the federal government to come down and help them and to take a look at this problem, which was, I guess, accomplished a couple of days ago for a couple of hours as like a photo op, nothing properly invested. This is the Democratic Party. These are not Republicans. These are Democrats. Colorado's governor decided to ship all the migrants that the federal government was shipping into his state to New York and Chicago. I mean, this is getting funnier by the minute. You know, all the tells are there. This problem is escalating. You know, I hate to get political, so this is not a political discussion. This is not about a Republican or a Democrat. This is about an American. This is about a father. This is about a person that cares for our young people and their future. 2 years after being sworn in, 5 million plus people later, 1 million of which at least are gotaways, which are individuals that have not been encountered by a law enforcement mechanism, detected by drones and cameras and other technologies, right? Suddenly, we have divine intervention and we go visit the border. And the lie continues. Mallorca can't get the story straight. Is it secure or unsecure? You know, the sad part about this whole conversation is all the Americans are having a hard time wrapping their arms around the gravity of this problem at this border because they live distanced from the border. It doesn't have what they perceive to be an immediate impact. So if you're in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, the Dakotas, Idaho, you're far removed. You really don't understand the gravity. We went through this with 9/11 also. When the buildings came down and I was standing in Times Square watching it, you know, when you're on the West Coast, you really can't wrap your arms around the severity or the gravity of the problem. That's what's going on at the border. This is going to continue to permeate through the United States. They are telling you, your leading law enforcement official, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, 2 months ago, came out and said it's a threat to our national security. I've been telling people the greatest threat, the greatest immediate threat to our national security is what's going on at this Mexican border. But we just can't seem to step up and do the right thing, which makes me very suspicious as to what the agenda is and who's driving it. You know, I wish we loved our children as much as we loved our politics. We just don't. You know, we're now watching the Republicans take control of the House of Representatives, and this is going to be interesting because I'm not going to mince words here. After it's been identified by your highest ranking, he's actually not the highest ranking law enforcement official. He's number 2 behind the Attorney General. After Christopher Wray identifies this as a threat to your national security, anyone that supports activities that threatens this national security here in this country, you're guilty of treason. I want to see what the Republicans do. Or is this a lot of posturing, a lot of rhetoric, a lot of deal making, a lot of patting each other on the back behind the scenes? Or are you going to go after this Hunter Biden issue and let us know as Americans, not as a political party? Was there something in his business practices that compromised the office of the vice president, now the president of the United States? Were there lies being told? You know, are we going to go after the borders with legislation? I'm still trying to figure out what everybody's going to do about our major cities, because we just had an election last November 8th, which was an affirmation of supporting the policies in all these major cities. And everybody who listened to Bob Boyce, the retired chief of detectives from New York City, New York's not even the conversation of decline when you talk about major cities. LA is shot. San Francisco is shot. Portland, Seattle, done. Philly, New Orleans, Chicago, done. Minneapolis, done. Milwaukee, done. We're not even in the top 10. I'm a little disappointed, to be candid with you. But it lends itself to this notion of resilience that New York has. I said prior to the election of November 8th, where they elected Kathy Hochul, Democratic governor, who does not seem to grasp the importance of repealing bail reform, that if they got or elected a Republican or conservative leadership in the governor's seat, repeal bail reform, address these district attorneys like Bragg that failed to prosecute, we could turn the city of New York around like that. It just has that resilient quality. It's driven a lot by the volume of people and business and economics. But as I was just speaking with the producer of the show, Lloyd Molander, about the vacancy rate of commercial real estate in New York, it is alarming. That's your tax base. I'm telling you here and now, sticking my foot out, my neck out, I should say. Goldman Sachs, if you see them leave New York, don't be surprised. They just laid off 3,200 employees, which is an interesting tell. By the way, Bob Iger, the chairman and CEO, returned to Disney, ABC, has just implemented a 4-day work week. Brilliant man this guy is. I started working for Bob when he was the president of ABC Entertainment in the very early 90s. Brilliant guy. Great move, because nobody wants to come back into New York City to go to work. It's labor intensive. They're imposing this congestion pricing, the price of gasoline, the price of tolls, and the heartache in dealing with mass commutation is overwhelming in New York. It's not, in any stretch of the imagination, nearly as dangerous, as bad as Chicago, for example, that has 54 shootings a week. New Orleans, as Bob Boyce mentioned, this is becoming a shooting gallery. So is Philadelphia. I'm just trying to understand what's going on with the American public, that you're so attached to these political entities that really don't care about you, folks, that you're flushing the future of your children down the toilet and this country in general. You got to pull your head out of your hiney at some point and start looking at what's going on and vote your conscience, vote ethics, vote honor, vote integrity, vote trustworthiness, everything that's left of conversation in the government, by the way. Let that guide your decision for who you vote for. And I'm not telling you to vote for a Republican or a Democrat. It's not that I don't care. Either you need to vote for people that are going to protect the future of your children and their freedom. We're going down a very dark path, guys, and we don't seem to have the ability to throw the brakes on. Let me say something else to you that I say all the time. At some point, the light may go on with everyone. We have overpopulated this country. From the time the Kennedy administration to current, we've doubled the population. As everything increases in size, it becomes exponentially more difficult to manage. We experience exponentially an increase in problems like mental illness and violence and people being disenfranchised because we don't take care of anyone. I don't know where to go with this conversation with you guys. It's in the hands of the American public to change the course of the country. I'm now worried about the 2024 election, and I'm not anti-Democrat. I voted for Democrats. Okay, I told you my favorite all-time president was John Kennedy. Period. Conservative Democrat. It's not like I'm a Republican, because I'm not. Neither one of these parties are doing us any favors, especially the minority community, I might note. Just very quickly about this murder in Idaho. I said from the outset this was a serial killer. And the reason I said that was in the 49 plus years I've been in this community and exposed to information on the learning curve, you have to understand how labor intensive this murder was. That when you want to kill someone, using a knife is really very difficult because there has to be redundancy in the exercise. I can shoot you in the noggin once and take you out. You could be done. when you stab someone, you have to know how to do it. You have to know how to maneuver the knife. You could hit bone. There's a lot of variables. He didn't go to the first floor. He went to the second and third floor. We don't really quite know what floor he hit first, but the bottom line is they did a bang-up job, a lot with the help of the FBI, so everybody's clear about this, and the state police in Idaho. No disrespect to that agency, but they weren't ready for this, nor should they ever have to be in a college town. You just have to understand what's going on in our learning environments. I don't want to go off on a tangent about you can't send your kids to school without an alarmed lunatic like myself protecting them. Something's gone wrong. There's no accountability. But this Idaho incident, I said from the outset, this kid's a serial killer. The question with him was, this his maiden voyage, or are we going to find bodies like we did with Ted Bundy spewing across the country? The other thing that people don't understand is from the time Ted Bundy participated in this activity to present, the DNA, the forensics, the technology make it almost impossible for you to cross the street and not know it if we want to know it. Just please trust me. Anyway, very quickly, I want to thank our sponsors, Instacart and Buzzsprout. I appreciate their support. They're both legitimate business entities. And I know that one of our callers is on right now, I believe. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to come right back to him. We're going to come back to Steve Sullivan, who you will find incredibly interesting. We'll be right back, guys. Instacart, another interesting concept. You can go to your favorite grocery stores, sign on to their application without leaving your home, the comfort of your home. Just pick out the items you'd like. They'll assign a personal shopper for you and deliver them to the point that you would like them delivered to. Another great concept, very user-friendly, and I'll be honest, we use it also. It's very effective, and they're very, very good. They're very on point. So we're back, ladies and gentlemen, and as I was just speaking to these Idaho murders, no one has better crime labs than the FBI. They're just absolutely phenomenal. Their agents don't investigate homicide by trade. They handle terrorism, they handle banking issues, a lot of white-collar crime. They have a lot of lawyers and accountants work for them. Homicide's a different thing. The only time they might get involved is if you assaulted or murdered a federal official, like the FBI, the president, Secret Service agent, things of that nature. So there was a lot of, I would say, concerted effort on both sides in collaborative form to identify who this young man was. And if I understand this correctly, there was a police officer in Washington about 10 minutes away that tipped off the Elantra, that Toyota Elantra. Is that what it was, Toyota? And put the FBI onto them. And as you know, this went the way that it did. And you have to just remember this also, guys. A lot of the information that you're getting is being regulated prudently. That was one of the great things about how this investigation was handled. They maintained the integrity of this investigation. We still really don't know all the nuances to this. Something I do want the public to understand is that there's a death penalty in Idaho, and this might be what we call let's make a deal time in lieu of executing this young man, because I have a feeling convicting him isn't going to be a problem. It's going to be beyond a reasonable doubt based on the forensics that they're alluding to, providing the media is accurate. The whole problem is we have a media credibility issue today, guys. Highly likely they could go to him and ask him for the nuances of this murder he committed. Let me not say he committed, because he's innocent until proven guilty, that he's suspected to having commit. And we'll just see exactly what happens there. I mean, he could explain the motive. He could explain whether other murders across the country, perhaps. There's a lot of backstory to this thing. But I said from the very outset, this was a serial killer, and that's because of the extent that he went to in carrying out this act. Is really quite interesting, and we need him to tell the tale. Back when I was in California a bit more proactively after 1989, when I relocated there to open an office, they had quite a number of serial killers, and the forensic psychiatrist came out and said, we have to stop executing them. We have to start learning from them, right? Because that will help us identify characteristics, or what they call MOs, modus operandi, in the future. So I think a little of that applies with this case. They did a great job. It was done as expeditiously as possible. college kids, I was one of them. We're still kids. We're like little boys in big men's suits. Don't be fooled. We're chasing women and grades or whatever you're chasing, but you're not really ready for these type of episodes or incidents. And, they fortunately have the student body going back there, and I suspect they're going to have to augment their law enforcement presence or security presence for a while to usher them back into a mental state that is convenient for them. So we now have Jeff and Steve on, so we're going to go to them right away. I will tell you that Jeff has had quite an illustrious career in life in general. He's an Annapolis graduate, was a naval officer, worked in the FBI. I believe his last assignment, or one of the last assignments, and he can further elaborate on this, was overseeing Interpol in Lyon, France on behalf of the FBI. Steve is a little different. I'm a little reluctant to speak to Steve's background because I leave that to him. Colorful in its own right, very heavily traveled. He's got a lot of miles on him. And Steve, I say that to you kindly. I don't mean chronologically. I just mean by life experience, kind of like myself. So I want to bring you guys both on. And Jeff, give us a quick update of anything that you guys have been pursuing lately, and then I'm going to go to Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. It's good to be back. Again, just for the anybody new that might be listening in, I was a former naval officer, weapons and engineering type, and then spent just shy of 22 years with the FBI, focused on weapons of mass destruction, counterterrorism, and a lot of other areas, and then transitioned that more recently in the past 6 years into global security. So been working, Steve and I, or Sully as I call him, have been working together for about 5 years, and we find best-in-class security technologies, and we help secure critical infrastructure, and that could mean anything from the U.S. nuclear power plants or power plants in some other country, because we worked in 32 countries last year, training or helping to secure facilities, and or it could mean somebody's home, right? And so they're trying to secure the home for themselves and their family. So we do the full spectrum. Lately, we've actually done some large projects. We've done some threat vulnerability assessments down in Texas for some clients where there was 13 large commercial buildings, hotels, restaurants, very large facility, and we help them to be able to understand how to upgrade their security using technology, not adding more bodies, and being able to have a more effective and efficient response. We've also worked with clients globally who are interested in learning more about technology related to drones. Obviously, we're seeing overseas, whether it's in Ukraine or and that's being used both ways by the Ukrainians.
What about Mexico, Jeff? Not to interrupt you, sir, but I'm hearing that the Mexican government just implemented drones to neutralize some of the cartel activity.
Well, and they need to, Lou, because what's happening is the cartel are very successfully utilizing drones proactively to be able to identify, to look ahead for their smuggling operations, whether it's people or drugs or weapons, where they can see if we have any law enforcement coverage in an area, right? So we need to be able to counter that, and the Customs and Border Patrol personnel have been doing that successfully, and they're continuing to increase the use of those drones, and we're seeing it in a number of South American countries where there's elections going on as well, right? We're seeing counter UAS systems being employed, many different types, and on different scales of success as well. So there's a lot of technology out there. Part of what we do is help do the due diligence to see if it makes sense from a effectiveness standpoint or a cost standpoint.
Jeff, let me go to Steve. Steve, you and I have spoken on numerous occasions about this. Tell us a little bit about your background, as much as you're comfortable with. And I know that you and Jeff have been collaborating, as Jeff identified, for 5 years. And the great thing about this relationship for me with you guys is I just constantly learn. I got into this business not so much in its infancy, but way before technology came into play. And now it's just an incredible support mechanism for someone like myself. But Steve, let's get into you a little bit.
Sure, Lou. Appreciate the kind words for this old horse. I appreciate that.
A lot of it was lies, but it's okay.
You've always been fairly truthful, I think. What my background has specifically been in technology and cyber. I've developed command and control facilities. Actually, was in the corporate world prior. Built out actually an airline reservation system for a well-known airline. Then I picked up and worked with one of the agencies to develop technology that would be able to handle unstructured data, which after 9/11 became a big issue within the United States.
So, Steve, stop. Explain what unstructured data is for our listeners.
Okay, going back 20 years ago, most of the data that was stored in computers were structured, meaning they were sitting in a disk and they had an index and a file, so you could actually read it. There were programs to read it, and they were very structured. First 10 positions were the name, last 6 positions was a zip code. That's how it was, and you could define a record, and you could understand what the content was. When you came to unstructured data after 9/11, we were dealing with PDFs, emails, Word documents, no structure to it, and it was impossible to understand what was in those documents. And our role was to put a technology together that could handle that. So my background has been specifically in cyber and in the intel space, and I've worked in reviewing technologies, worked with in the military relationship with high-ranking officials to look at technology that the country was looking at and to be able to say, give them an understanding of whether it would fit within the confines of what they were looking for. So one person I worked with said to me, "Sul, you've got I have these 800-pound heads that I deal with every day. Would you take a look at some of this stuff and give me your feeling on it?" And that's what I did. And I saw some of this technology and I said, we need to bring this into the private sector. Then Jeff and I hooked up through multiple friends in the FBI, and we've been using our Rolodex and relationships and technology to combine it to help protect our country and our assets. Assets to me is the most important thing is our children.
Can't argue with that, Steve.
That's one of the briefest things I've ever given, Lou.
That's because, Steve, there's so much to say. And unfortunately, I say this all the time. A good part of the American public, the vast majority, live in a bubble, and we insulate them from a lot of the harshness of the world. And clearly our elected officials are doing the same thing. I want to go back to this discussion with Mexico that, I've been talking about this border issue on this podcast and this radio show I've been doing for almost 2 years now. Ironically, since this president got into office, and I have no, political stance at this point. I'm not particularly fond of the Republicans or the Democrats, but this issue at the border is quite troubling. And, I'm hoping the American public understands that basically what we have operating in Mexico right now is tantamount to like Al-Qaeda. They are well organized. They are extremely well funded, no secret as to why, and they're heavily weaponized. And I'm trying to figure out at what point is the light going to go on with this government and understand that they're going to have to do some form of, I don't know what the word might be. I don't want to say an invasion of Mexico, but some type of interaction in Mexico to neutralize these cartels. Because if I understand it correctly from what I'm hearing, and either one of you can verify this, they've obtained operational control of our border. Jeff, you want to speak to that first?
Yeah, well, I think you asked what's it going to take to change things, and I think we're starting to see the beginning of that, where the border cities, the border states that are most affected are doing what they have to do. They're sharing the wealth, right? They're passing off. I mean, they can't take the economic burden all on themselves and their population. And so the logical thing to do is what they've been doing is to try to spread out the migrants. And we're seeing that in every country where Ukrainian refugees are being sent. I was just in Austria and in Germany, and it's much the same. They're trying to disperse the large numbers of migrants so that, one, they can get better care, and two, they don't overpopulate an area and take all the resources, right, that area might have. So they're trying to spread the wealth. And you're seeing that in the U.S. where the migrants are being sent inland, essentially, to other major cities that might have better resources. And it's getting an interesting response. People are upset that they're getting hundreds of migrants, whereas on the border, they're getting thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands, in one state alone. So I think there has to be a realization that and I don't think it's going to come until we start spreading that to every state in the country. And then all of a sudden people are going to say, wait a minute, we have got to do something about this, right? We have to be able to control it. From my understanding, that the U.S. Customs Border Patrol, they are absolutely the hardest working people, most competent that you have ever seen. I work with some of them, some former retired senior officials from there. And they have access to some technologies that they're trying to utilize to help fill the gaps, because it's just, our border's too big to be able to just put people there. So they're trying to use more and more technologies, but it's being countered, right, by as you said, the very well-financed other side, which is now doing they're doing more and more people smuggling because they're seeing it as more lucrative than even the drug smuggling, right?
Jeff, if I could just jump in here for 1 second. You know what I find interesting about the conversation in general in the country today is that we have quite a large number of elected officials that are Democrats that are pleading with the federal government to help them. And the federal government's sitting there as if there's nothing going on. We have the governor in Colorado rounding up the migrants in Colorado, sending them to Chicago and New York. And I agree 100% with you, and I spoke to that before both of you came on. Part of my concern, Jeff, is that, people that have distance between themselves and this border can't really wrap their arms around this problem. I don't expect that from Washington, though. You know what I mean? Or other places. I mean, I'm looking at New York City with 30,000 migrants being reported. He's asking for $1 billion of taxpayer money. I'm just trying to figure out, at what point will the light go on with the mass of this country? Because, like I said, if you're sitting in Michigan or the Dakotas or Idaho, Iowa, any number of these states that have a lot of geography between them and this border, you really can't wrap your arms around the gravity of this problem. But it's, I hate to throw this word out here because I'm just sick and tired of what's going on in D.C. I think we have a little touch of treason going on here. Your FBI director, Christopher Wray, came out 2 months ago in Senate hearings that I watched and said, what's going on at the Mexican border is a threat to our national security. What else should any other elected official need to hear, including the president, that would spurn some form of addressment? I don't get this, and I don't want to get into this whole political tangent, but the Republicans now have control of the House. I want to see if they go after impeachment. I want to see if they go after treason, because that's what we have here. We're being told by everybody, including Santa Claus and the 8 reindeer, about this fentanyl problem. It's resonating throughout this country. It's hitting the heartland of the country. They're just having a hard time reconciling. It's the byproduct of this border. What's the break point here? And again, this is a little off the topic of technology, which we're going to go back to, because, I want to talk about gotaways right now, gentlemen. Either one of you can address this. We're talking 1 million plus gotaways in this country since this administration started. Explain to people what a gotaway is, Jeff or Steve, either one of you.
I'll let Jeff say that's what the FBI used to do.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, Lou, what we try and do when we have border crosses, we try and ensure that they're registered, number one, so we know who's coming into our country. And we try and find a place for them so we know where they are. And in some cases, they're supposed to, come back and check in, essentially, right, so that they can kind of be tracked. And they do this for all sorts of reasons. One, just for law and order. And number two is for being able to resource the locations that have the significant amount of migrants. So what's happening is that people aren't doing that, right? They're registering and then they're never heard from again. No idea. So we in the U.S. have no idea where they are. Where in the country? Are they still in the country? What state they're in? What city? We don't know. So essentially, we lose track of them, right? And as you said, the numbers continue to grow. And again, what this does is cause hardship, because then it's very difficult to have an organized response to be able to assist and provide resources, everything from lodging to food, humanitarian assistance, et cetera, and also to be able to allocate security personnel, because you just don't know where people are. So that's essentially the issue. There's absolute chaos in some, as this number continues to rise, and that the individuals continue to relocate and move from state to state until they get to wherever they finally settle in. And even then, you're not seeing a registration and there's no tracking.
We're going to take a quick break, guys. We're going to come back to this conversation because this is a critically important conversation. I want to stay in the lane of technology with Jeff and Steve, but between you and I, guys, we have conversations independent of the show, and there are other issues in this country like this unharnessed media, this organization that seems to have no accountability, the only one that I'm aware of, protected by the Constitution. We can't get into that today. We're not going to have time because of this conversation with technology. But we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back to you guys. Just stick with us here. So let me tell you a little bit about Buzzsprout. Very interesting concept. Basically, it allows you to set up your own podcast. One of the most advantageous things about using Buzzsprout is it's user-friendly. So I encourage you highly, if your inclination is to create your own podcast, please look into Buzzsprout. And by the way, we use it. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. We have Jeff Mueller, former FBI, Steve Sullivan, rather gray. I'm going to leave him right there.
You calling my hair color?
No, except the Mr. Jack and diet. I won't get into that today. You and I are the only ones with gray hair running around, Steve, these days. But, we're talking about this border. We're talking about technology. Jeff has a very thorough, comprehensive background and understanding of what's transpiring as people are entering this country illegally, processed and being let go. And we also have this issue with people that are getting into the country without being encountered by a law enforcement mechanism. And I refer to them as the mass media does, as gotaways. We know of them because of drones. Am I correct, gentlemen? And cameras, correct? And
Drones, yeah.
And they're in 1 million plus, they're saying. And I'm just, guys, the interesting part of this conversation, and again, I don't want to go off on a tangent about local law enforcement. This is at a time where we can't get enough cops, and the cops we have are reluctant to work because of the consequences at times of doing their job, and then being judged by the public after the fact. They call them armchair quarterbacks, right? Or Monday morning quarterbacks. I think the timing of this thing is just really problematic. But I want to go back to the technology aspect of this discussion and the borders. So, Steve, Jeff, one of the things I've said, and I know this is going to offend a lot of people, my position is anybody entering this country today, regardless of your point of origin, should give us a photograph, your fingerprints, and your DNA, period. It would make it a lot easier for us as we start to navigate activities in this country that are potentially a problem, whether it's a threat to our national security by people who have entered this country with an agenda of terrorism or just basic conventional crime. I'm sure the ACLU would find a problem with this. God, why would we ever implement some type of policy that would protect the American public and especially our children? But I want to go back into this whole technology discussion. We have facial recognition. We have drones. We have cyber, we have weapons detection. We have so much technology to protect that border, correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, that a lot of what's going on there is completely unnecessary. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Elaborate,
Steve.
Well, when you think about the technology the country has, it is so advanced. You can, let's say the border wall was completed. Each of these areas could be controlled besides the entry of each entry port. You could have cameras on all of those on the walls. You have your drones run informational based upon a sighting on the other side. You can do all of this. Technology is available, and it's not as expensive as everybody thinks it is. And it's able to be easily put up and easily managed. I mean, you can pick from a satellite. You can pop people's head. We've been able to pick up people's faces, and we can literally, looking at structurally face, we can tell you almost how old these people are. There's so many ways that we can do stuff. Jeff was working with a group down in Mexico where there was a camera system put together with some security, and that was an unbelievable success, putting it in that facility, in that capability. I'll let Jeff go in on that, but technology is there, and it can be implemented easily. You can control the cameras, you can control the bodies on the ground, where they go, so they're not wasting their time chasing. When they put 50 people running over here and the two guys you worry about, it, they can't see them. This tells you that from the drone or from a camera or even from motion.
I want to talk about facial recognition for a second, guys, because, we know how to use that, for example, in the workplace. Like if you dismiss somebody for employment practices, right? In other words, a corporation has to let go of someone. We'd like to recommend to them you interface your computer with your cameras and feed a photo in, so if anybody breaks that lens, you'll know they're there. How does that work at the border, do you think, as far as a known quantity, right? People on watch lists, for example, right? Are we doing anything like that? And if not, why not, is, I guess, the $64 question.
Yeah, so, Lou, the issue of facial recognition, obviously, it gets kind of a visceral reaction from people, and I think there's a big misunderstanding. It can be an incredibly positive, powerful tool, and if it's controlled. And an example would be, think of any number of these school shootings where an individual was expelled from the school, wasn't supposed to be on the school grounds, right? We can enter that individual's face like you can enter an individual who's a cartel leader or a known smuggler into cameras on the border. But at the school, we enter their face. The minute they walk onto the campus, grounds where you've got your existing perimeter cameras, we have entered only their face. We're not searching. We're not identifying all of the other kids there. We're not looking to look into deal with any privacy issues. We're not looking to identify all of the kids. All we want to know is if that one individual that was legally expelled from the school through the school's process steps foot on that school grounds, we want to be able to notify immediately, and we can do that using existing cameras. I don't understand the argument about privacy related to something like that, or if there were known pedophiles in the area. Right? It's the same thing that they do in casinos these days. If you're a known pickpocket or a thief, you're in a database. So you walk into that casino and they're going to identify you and come and address you and say, you're not welcome here. So there's ways that we can use it for the safety of our children on the borders. There are some doing it, Lou. We're pushing hard. There's a lot of funds coming out now, both for religious facilities and for schools there's grant money that's available. Of course, the process, it's a government-run process, so it's a little difficult, but we're trying to help clients through it to be able to get the funds that the government is offering and assist with their security, their enhanced security. So, we also have weapon recognition technology where we're using cameras. And we can use the algorithms, the artificial intelligence, biometric algorithms that we can put on the endpoint, meaning we put it into the camera essentially. So what the camera is seeing when it registers a weapon, it will immediately go to a response protocol. And that can be, if you were in a school and it recognized a weapon out in the parking lot, we can auto lock doors, we can set off alarms, we can notify police so they can start moving. We can notify teachers, right? Principals, whatever it might be. But we give we give alerting and better situational awareness. And you can use this same thing in a Walmart, a retail, a business, like you said, where you've entered an individual that had made threats after being fired, that they were going to come back and do harm. All of those things. Seconds count. We try and design it using our background in response. We understand the timeliness of it. We understand the need to put obstacles between an individual and their intended goal, and that's what we do. And so that technology can be incredibly useful on the border. We can do line crossing, right? So we can establish within, it's called line or zone crossing. We can establish areas on the border or past the border at let's say, natural checkpoints, a valley surrounded by that they may have to come through in order to be able to after they've crossed the border into the U.S. We can establish cameras and just notifications, right? It's simple motion sensor technology. And with that, you can identify also, if you wanted to put in known smugglers, cartel members, et cetera, as a person of interest, you can put that in there and have that that automated alerting.
But Jeff, we're just not doing it,
No.
And Steve, I'm going to direct this to you. This whole discussion about facial recognition, I think it caught the attention of the ACLU. Am I correct, Steve?
Yeah, they were always afraid of taking a picture and it would hurt a child later. An example is, if there's a picture in there of my son and something happens in the future outside of the school, he graduates and he does something, that picture, that information is sitting in there, and it could be against him. And that's a serious mistake. I'll give you a personal thing that happened. My son, when he was little, he disappeared on us in a mall at the age of 2. I couldn't find him. I ran everywhere. I couldn't do anything to find him. Finally, I found him. That night, John Walsh was running a thing when his son Adam had been taken and was killed. He was on a show. And I called in and said, look, I'm going to donate some technology. And I donated it to the school systems in New Jersey. And they first were ecstatic. And then we got so much pushback because of just what I said. They were afraid if that information on that child was in that computer, it could come back and haunt them. But I said to them, I'll tell you what, if my child was gone, I wouldn't care what was in that computer. I don't care if he ate chocolate upside down and he ran over popcorn in the house. I would let them know everything about my child to get my child back. There's a mistake with what they're thinking is this is a valuable tool. Another example is in New York City. They didn't want these cameras. They said, oh, no, you can't put the faces up. But isn't it funny, Lou, when there's a shooting or there's something, where do the police go? They go to the local people in the stores that got cameras and they want to see their cameras. I mean, what the hell is wrong with them? They should be putting cameras up in the city. They're going for cameras. It's contradicting what they do.
Steve, I believe the city has Argus, don't they, in New York City? I think it's about 3,000 cameras that are...
Yeah, they had a system. They also had some in the subway. I don't know what's happened with it. They were supposed to advance it, but I'm not sure what really happened with it.
What's unfortunate is that every time we get into an area where we're discussing technology, we're worried about whose feelings we're going to hurt, and who we're going to violate their rights. I just said to you, gentlemen, a second ago, my attitude is: you come into this country, DNA, fingerprints, your current photograph, although photographs change over time, something that furthers the advancement of keeping the country safe. But I sometimes think, guys, that we're suffering from the, I'd say, protections of the Constitution. I mean, people have to decide, are you going to want to be safe or do you want to have a country? I mean, this is just getting ridiculous here, because I followed this whole discussion with facial recognition, and, I understand it a little bit how it works, and it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it'll also identify characteristics in your eyes and your nose and things of that nature where they can collaboratively try to picture or identify who they're looking at, and right away the ACLU and a number of organizations are all worried about everybody's civil rights. If you're not doing anything wrong, number one, who cares what we do in this country today? I don't know what to say. I've said this repeatedly. We've overpopulated this damn place because we're not taking care of anybody. You guys are sitting here with your hand, your finger on the throttle of technology that's going to make this country safer, make even the world safer, and all we get is pushback. I want to tap into this whole thing with the Ukraine momentarily, because it lends itself to the technology that we're employing to help them. Am I correct, Jeff, Steve, one of you gentlemen?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Clearly, there is a growing demand, and we're continuing to fill that. And it's not just us. We're working with entities around the world that are looking for items, technology items. I mean, of course, there's continued need for humanitarian items in the face of the growing food shortage, but also, of course, there's supplying of weapon systems. But really, the face of warfare in this conflict, this war, has significantly changed. I mean, you're seeing it, right? You're seeing the automation. There's no hiding anymore, right? They're sending these drones out in droves, not only for spotting, right? In the past, you'd have to send, scout teams out, right? Snipers, scout teams. Now you can send drones out, high altitude drones, to be able to locate enemy positions. And then you can actually send drones in that are armed, right? And
Jeff, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Aren't we in fact doing that for the Ukrainian government? Isn't that part of what we're doing? As well as feeding them intelligence in an overall general sense?
Yeah, again, I'm not involved in the intelligence sharing piece of it, Lou, but I would estimate that we absolutely are assisting in that, and we definitely are sending technology solutions to the Ukrainians and helping to train them, right? And in some cases, it's through private entities that were developed to counter groups like the Wagner Group that, they are using on the private, they're government controlled, but privatized on the Russian side. And of course, we have the Mozart Group. That's a group of former, SF operators that are kind of developed to counter and help to train the Ukrainians and get them the technology that they need. So, yeah, I think it's being done at all levels, and but the use of the technologies, especially the drone technology. I mean, these days you can have a drone with a flamethrower attached to it. You can, of course, drop grenades, rockets. We've seen that very successfully employed in a lot of areas, even outside of such as Syria, outside of just the current conflict. So it's a growing concern, and it's why a lot of these presidential protection details now are arming themselves or looking to arm themselves with counter drone technology.
We're going to take a quick break, guys, and we're going to take a quick break. Stay with me for a second. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back to this conversation. Jeff Mueller, Steve Sullivan, we've gone off, as you can tell now, talking about technology and how it's being implemented in various forms in the Ukraine, for example, but trust me when I tell you, it's not limited there. And Jeff just brought up something very interesting about how protection details of elected officials are going to be using this. We're going to be right back. We're going to come right back to this topic, guys. Stick with us. Thank you. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. We have with us today, we were lucky to have with us today, again, Steve Sullivan, Jeff Mueller, both distinguished backgrounds in service to this country. And I would say I don't think there's anybody as good as they are personally in the tech world, and I'm familiar with who's in that world. It's a little bit of my world. We're talking about the utilization of technology at our borders in warfare in the Ukraine, and Jeff just touched on something about how we're protecting our elected officials with the use of drones. Jeff, you want to elaborate on this a little more?
Yeah, I was specifically talking about the increased need for counter drone systems because of the existing threat of drones. And again, we just saw it in actually two separate electoral process going on in South American countries where one of them had essentially a portable gun that operates. There's a number of different ones. They shoot nets. They can shoot a lot of different things. Now, the counter argument to that is you got to be really lucky and really fast and really good to be able to, get something like that up in the air with the speed of these drones. But the counter, there's also systems that can be used to essentially put an umbrella or a cone around a location that can't be entered into by a drone, right? It'll automatically return the drone to base, or it will stop the drone from entering a location. So we work with companies that are in development. There's a lot of technology that has been developed by the military in the past and now has gone commercial. And that process continues. So it's kind of a race, Lou, as the drones continue to be utilized more and they proliferate and their use cases expand, then there's a need to be able to protect against them, right? But again, we can also use them proactively, right? So you can be a part of a protective detail. And if you think there's a concern, such as a roadblock that you might be entering, or an ambush site that you might be entering that you're concerned about, you could be sitting in your car with a portable screen, such as an iPad, and be sending your drone out ahead to be your eyes. So the technology is incredible, and it just has to be balanced, and we've got to keep on the leading edge of it.
I want to ask you a question so that the listener really understands this technology we're talking about. I would say, should be common knowledge that this frozen airspace when the president's in a particular environment. And what you're saying is that technology exists that would actually block a drone from entering into a certain zone. Is that what we just said, Jeff?
Correct.
Yeah.
Steve, that's pretty interesting. Guys, I want to go up, have a quick discussion about cyber also, Steve, for a second. The first thing, Steve, just give the listener a little bit of insight as to how many cyber attacks this country experiences on a daily basis, because I think this is going to shock people. Go ahead, Steve.
There's multiple facets. There's multiple attacks. You're getting attacks against our government's infrastructures. You'll get thousands on a daily basis that are trying to break into our government-controlled facilities, whether it's the grids, whether it's a nuclear power plant. There's thousands that the government foils because we've got some really talented technology guys. But there's also the private sector that's getting hit even harder because in most cases, most of these companies today don't have the skill set to be able to fight these kind of hackers. Years ago, we always had an edge. These are bad guys have got as good as us. And in most cases, some of these guys were trained by us. They may have gone to one of the universities here and learned how to do it. So the hospitals, banks, corporations, you see them every day. They're being hacked. They're being held ransom. So that's a big thing. And one of the biggest fears that I've had and I've worked on is I think one of the most dangerous things for this country is the grid. Our grid goes down, and that's where they can hack in their grid. Think about what happened in New York, Lou. I don't know, was it 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it was? The whole city was shut down for like, I would say, almost a half a day. People walking over the Brooklyn Bridge. That's probably the most vulnerable piece we've got.
And you gentlemen have technology that would prevent a foreign entity or an adversary, let's use that term, from hacking into our infrastructure, for example. Steve, real quickly, I just want to go back to that that oil. Was that Colonial in North Carolina, remember, last year?
I believe it was Colonial that had an issue.
What happened there, Steve? Explain to the listener what happened there, because I know they had some software, but it wasn't up to date. Is that correct?
It wasn't like I say, it was, let's say, a version 2. I'm making this up, a version 2. And the bad guys were able to can get to version 2, but couldn't get to version 4 if they had been updating it. So the bad guys had much more advanced technology than that company had at the time. They didn't harden their infrastructure. They didn't harden their network.
Interesting. Is the government, since that incident, do you know, Steve, if they've mandated that all of these various moving parts in our country, not necessarily attached to the government, but attached to our day-to-day function, our infrastructure, have they mandated that they step up their programs to prevent what happened with Colonial happening again?
I don't believe they've mandated it. Okay, I think they've put some situations where I can talk a little bit to healthcare. The large Medicares, the heavier insurers have put penalties on if something like that should happen. Okay, I know they've took a harder line on it because healthcare is a big thing. You shut down a hospital, you shut down MRI machines. So I think they've taken an advance moving along on it than any of the other segments of the market right now.
And this thing with cyber, this is almost like a one-upmanship that every day, Steve, it continues to evolve as all technology does. In other words, as we're talking on our cell phones or using a particular generation of technology that you guys might use to protect the country or to monitor a situation, it's in the evolution process as we're talking. They're working on the next generation. Am I correct?
Correct. I'll give you a very quick example. Back a while ago, there's a bunch of young kids, hackers that are between anywhere from the ages of like 12 to 17, that they would go around and they'd have like this organization that if they could see who could hack into this organization, this government facility, and show they can sign on, it was almost like a competition these kids are doing. And these are talented kids in this country. So if they're doing it here, and they're not doing it to harm them, but what about the guys who do have that capability and do want to harm? Get into the NSA, get into NORAD, get into, a public service. That's a scary thing, but these kids are able to do it.
Let me ask this question, Steve and Jeff. What branch or what element of the government is responsible to monitor this cyber activity in the country and to offset it? In other words, to put in a mechanism that prevents penetration, for example. Who is that? Is it collaborative with the FBI, NSA, CIA? What's that mechanism? Are they collaborating, number one? Are they doing this independently, as oftentimes they do?
Yeah, Lou, the three you mentioned clearly have not so much the CIA in the U.S., but the FBI surely does. The Department of Homeland Security, they have specific departments that they've developed, organizations that do nothing but focus on that. The military got into developing commands, cyber commands, that specifically have both defensive and offensive capabilities. And I just saw 2 days ago they've had another subunit develop, a very specialized unit. So I think it's a collaborative effort. I hope that they are collaborating. I know, they have both domestic and international meetings, conferences that in some cases some of our people attend, and that we attend from the critical infrastructure standpoint. But I tell you, the one area that continues to grow is the utilization of cryptocurrency, digital currency. Right? China just became the first full implementer of digital currency, and as that continues to grow, there's huge gaps in us being able to forensically track where money is being transferred, how it's being transferred, where it's being stored. And so we work with some really top-notch groups, both out of the U.S. and other countries, that are developing capabilities to be able to forensically track where those transactions are occurring and where the money's going.
Looking after bad actors.
Guys, unfortunately for today, we've run out of time, and as the public or the listener can probably tell, we could keep talking about this and go down a multitude of avenues. And I'll be honest with you, we've just only scratched on this discussion. We've not really got into chem bio or the continuous evolution of weapons detection systems and shot spotting. There is so much technology out there, and interestingly enough, as I said to Jeff and Steve, as we're talking about it, it's continuing to evolve and go into the next generation and become that much more sophisticated. Hopefully, this conversation today gave our listener a little bit of peace of mind that we have some very astute individuals in the private sector, Steve and Jeff, and our government, I think, is on top of this. Guys, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you for joining us. This has been Between the Lines. I encourage you to send us emails or call in betweenthelines.tv, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Jeff and Steve, thank you so much for today once again.
Very welcome, Lou. Pleasure.
Be well,
Thank you.
gentlemen.